I was watching an episode of The Line recently, and a theist threw out the accusation that atheists accept figures from the past with less evidence and hold Jesus to a higher standard. Now, Matt Dillahunty and Jimmy Snow, who were doing that episode, did not pick this up because the person threw it out haphazardly in a flurry of other things that had nothing to do with the topic they were discussing. But it got me thinking, I do hear this from time to time, so I thought I would make a video on it. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I am an atheist and a skeptic, and my research area is literature, which means I have dealt with loads of stories and claims about the past. So, how do I evaluate claims from the past? And do I have a different standard for the claims of Christianity? We can see this question phrased in these Quora posts. This first one, are atheists biased when it comes to standards of evidence for Jesus as opposed to other figures of history? Or this other one, is there a historical character we assume that was real that has similar or less evidence supporting than as Jesus? After a historical, not biblical answer. I have heard this question thrown out, often as an accusation, with a lot less curiosity than those Quora posts seem to have. They say that there is more evidence for Jesus than other figures of history, and there are more manuscripts from the Bible than other historical documents. Now, by the way, the number of manuscripts itself means nothing. I mean, it's the quality of the manuscripts that's important. The number just says a lot of people copied this story. What are the manuscripts? Do we have archival records of birth or death or living in a place? Do we have a Roman authority citing some dude walking on water as part of a report? In Jesus' case, we just don't have that kind of stuff. So what is the evidence we have for Jesus? It is the books of the Old Testament, the earliest copies of which are decades after his supposed life. Some Roman historians discuss the fact that Christians worshipped Christ there in the early part of that Roman Empire, but they are reporting what is believed they didn't know Jesus firsthand. Even Paul didn't meet Jesus. He had a vision and then is supposed to have met with people who knew Jesus. Okay, so we have stories. Sometimes somebody in Jerusalem digs up something that they claim could be something associated with Jesus, but these are just sites, and that's just a statement they make. Did you know you can go to Verona, Italy and see a balcony called Juliet's balcony? It's from the era that the play Romeo and Juliet is set in, so it must be true and not a tourist trap, right? There are other historical figures that are in a similar position to Jesus. Like Socrates. We don't really know if Socrates existed. Plato writes about him. But there is a big difference. It doesn't matter if Socrates existed. Hell, it doesn't matter if Plato existed. The writings exist, and it is the writings that are of interest. Neither of these people claim to be the Son of God granting salvation. They were practicing philosophy. While it is a curiosity to know if they existed, our time is not well spent obsessing over that fact. Reading the works, contemplating their message and the relevance to our lives today, looking at how these ideas impacted those around them and through history is way more interesting. Now, we're always going to say, Plato's Republic or whatever. We're not going to say allegedly or Socrates allegedly did this because, people who study it know maybe this person did or didn't. The point is the writings exist. Now, to the extent that belief in Jesus impacted our history in the Western world, the New Testament is interesting. But I would argue that the books aren't all that great, and Jesus' philosophy is very derivative. But most important, the message, what he preached was about God and what is right to believe, etc. Accepting his existence is vital to accepting Christianity. If Jesus didn't exist, Christianity doesn't mean anything. But if Plato or Socrates didn't exist, the philosophy is still worth something considering and evaluating, and it's not a belief system that you have to take or leave. You can look at it, take parts of it, etc. Again, it's something to study. Or let's take another ancient figure, Homer, who is responsible for the epic cycle on the Trojan War, of which we now have the Iliad and Odyssey today. By the way, there's a new translation of the Iliad out there for those of you interested in, what else can they come up with today? So, go knock yourself out in that regard. Anyway, Homer, another figure that we have little evidence for. Really, we have writings about him. It's a sort of a legend that you can find in Greek texts that refer to a blind poet wandering Greece. There are a lot of questions we could ask about the truth of any of it. So first, was Homer a real person? We don't know. If he existed, was he really blind? Well, we don't know if he existed, much less if he was blind. Don't know. How much of these works are attributable to him, and how much should he inherit from oral tradition? So I'm not in a position to say anything about that because I'm not a scholar of ancient Greek. Hell, we can actually ask, did the Trojan War actually happen? There is some material existence in a place that might have been Ilium or Troy, but who knows? And if it was a real war, how much of the events recounted in this story are real? We don't know. Again, I would argue that it doesn't much matter if Homer existed or if the Trojan War happened. These works are worth reading just as stories, but also as insight into the minds of ancient peoples. The work stands on its own, regardless of the truth behind it. Someone had to have written them down. Does it matter if we call that person Homer or their works attributed to Homer? Again, there's no message that your afterlife depends on some belief about them, by the way, like with Jesus. But here is something that's important to note. In these works, no one takes the interventions of deities and magical elements as true. In case you don't know, the Greek pantheon has a hand in this war. Ares and some other gods roam the battlefield. Zeus weighs outcomes and sends false dreams to Agamemnon. Athena holds back Achilles' braid and tells him he can't kill Agamemnon. Apollo knocks Patroclus off the walls of Troy and unbuckles the armor he's wearing. Oh, did I mention there were going to be spoilers? I hope I didn't spoil the Iliad for you. Can you spoil a story that's thousands of years old? It's still worth reading even if you know what happens. The point is, I don't imagine anyone takes these interventions at face value, even if they believe the Trojan War happened and they think a Homer existed. And in there's a similarity with the Gospels. Who believes that Jesus raised the dead, walked on water, turned water into wine, and other magic tricks? So basically, I have the same skepticism about these texts. I can accept that there was a dude named Jesus preaching in ancient Palestine and the Romans executed him. I don't accept the magic stuff. Just like I could imagine there was somebody, maybe named Achilles, maybe not, running around killing a bunch of Trojans, but I don't accept the magical elements that he was the daughter of a goddess or that Athena helped him, etc., etc. Let's move on to a time that was just slightly before Jesus' time and was actually a time in the Roman Empire when a lot was being written. We have a lot of records. Julius Caesar. So this is a historical figure who lived in the 1st century BCE. How can we know anything about him? How can we be sure he lived? Well, first off, he actually did leave his own writings. I have sometimes heard Christians say, well, there are more manuscripts of the New Testament than of Caesar's writings. But again, the number don't really matter. Those manuscripts on the New Testament aren't Jesus' writings. Like, we don't have anything that the dude wrote, whereas we do have something Julius Caesar wrote. And it's not just that he left his own writings. People who lived at the same time, like Cicero, also left writings and talked about Caesar, in part saying what a great orator he was, for example. And it's interesting because the Romans were good at keeping records, and so the fact that there isn't records of Jesus at a time when we did have a big bureaucracy, that's always sort of notable. But beyond those things, we have Caesar's writings, we have other people writing about Caesar. We also have statues of Julius Caesar. We have coins with his name and likeness. So there actually is physical evidence. I mean, it would just be weird to not accept Julius Caesar as having existed and lived and done the things that are attributed to him, because there is so much material evidence that a dude named Julius Caesar lived and did stuff like wars in Gaul. And more than that, we know that there are rulers, we know that wars happen, we know people get assassinated. Like, this stuff happens all the time. These aren't like magical claims. But, that doesn't mean that historians just look at what Caesar said and call it a day. They understand that people can make their actions out to be bigger, that Caesar might be self-aggrandizing, or that they want to diminish their mistakes. So in the case of Caesar, there are other people writing about him at the same time, and historians can go look at what did this person say, what did that person say, what does Caesar say, compare this, and get a more full picture of what might have been going on. And our interest in studying Caesar and the things he did is to learn more about humans and our history. I don't know what it would change to say that somebody made up the Gallic Wars, or that a building site begun under a different ruler. Historians try to learn what happened and construct the flow of time. And here's something else that they don't just accept at face value about Caesar. It says he was delivered by cesarean section. We just don't know that. There isn't evidence. That's one of the stories that's told about him, and it bears his name, the procedure. We know the ancients could do it, but that doesn't mean that that's what happened to him. And by the way, this is a mundane claim. Somebody being born by C-section is a very mundane claim. But we can't say for sure that this is what happened with him. So it's a legend that was told, and that's how historians always present it. And anyway, any supernatural claims, again, like that he might have been a deity or whatever, people don't accept. Anything magical that Caesar might have done, people would reject that. Let's come back to talking about Jesus. So we have no real material evidence. We don't have statues of Jesus. There's not his likeness on a coin. No attestations by contemporaries, no writings that Jesus himself left. What we have is people writing after the fact. And yet, most people will grant you that there was a Jesus. There is a position, the mythicist position, that says that Jesus was invented, but that's a minority position. And I think most people are willing to say, like, yeah, there probably was some dude running around. Maybe it was Jesus. It could have been an amalgam of people. The fact of the matter is we just don't have enough evidence. We just have these writings that came way after the fact. So, to conclude, we have a lot of claims about the past. We can accept some of those claims, reject others, and realize that there is not enough evidence to accept still other claims. We might continue mentioning the rejected claim because those claims form a part of the legend that people in the past were telling, and it is a window into the way that people understood the world. And to the extent that we are also trying to understand them, we ponder the legends that they created. So Christians who make this claim that we have a different standard for evaluating Jesus and the gospel than other historical things want the whole of the Bible to be true. They lump all of that into one claim, one truth, and make it seem like you have to accept this package. I think if we want an honest view of the past, we have to pick up each claim, think about it, and examine it. Maybe there was a Trojan War. Maybe there was an angry dude named Achilles. Maybe someone named Homer wrote down these verses. Doesn't mean that the gods were looking down on it all. And really, if we learn tomorrow that there was nothing in the Iliad that corresponds to fact, Homer is a lie, or there wasn't a Julius Caesar, but his evil twin Kenny, no one gets condemned to hell. Nobody's belief system falls apart. That's just, we learned that the past is not what we thought it was. But if there was no Jesus, there is no basis for their worship. There is no religion. They have nothing. And the fact that skeptics won't swallow this story whole is a niggling doubt for them that they want to assuage. So they say we're treating this story differently. But we aren't. They are. And I didn't even get into the fact that historians can go into archives that most normal people don't get to go into for various reasons. There are a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot more to that I could have said about any of this, so this is very basic. But what did you think? Have you heard this claim before? What are your thoughts on anything that I said or something slightly different? Put it in the comments below, and while you're down there, you can like, subscribe, and do all the YouTube stuff. You're on YouTube, you know what to do, and if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. That link is also in the description below, and I will see you sometime soon for something different. Until then, goodbye.